Hello everyone. I'm going to be talking to you about effective team building. How do you really get the very best out of the team that you have working with you and for you? And we're going to talk a little bit about some theory attached to that and some practical things you can do as the team leader. But first of all, what I'd like to do is to get you to think about a team that you've worked in or played with. I mean, it can be something in or outside of work. And have this in the back of your mind as I'm speaking. What were the things that made that team so special? So a team that was really effective, that you've been part of, inside or outside of work, that made it special. And also, perhaps, if you've been unfortunate, as I have, and I'm sure a number of us have, of ever working in a team or being in a team that didn't work so well. Have in your mind, what were the circumstances, what were the things, the factors that made that team less effective and less interesting to be part of? There are many theories about team development and what makes for really high-performing teams. But in summary, they really all look at three main areas, and they are team structure, first of all. And that's about getting the right people doing the right things. So have you got the right people in your team? And have you got the roles clear about what it is they're doing? Are they just working hard, or are they working on essential and important things? The second area is team processes. And this means all the ways in which we communicate as a team. So the kind of meetings we hold, and I'm aware that these days, sometimes we're holding meetings, virtual meetings, rather than face-to-face. So how many times do we meet? How frequently? What are the purpose of the meetings? Are they simply to update? Or are we there to support and encourage each other and to perhaps coach each other to do a better job? Also, how do we communicate generally? Is it mostly by email? Some people I know, even teams who sit closely together, fall into the trap of emailing each other when they could actually have a face-to-face conversation. So what are the processes we have as a team in the way we communicate and get the job done? And the third area is about team behaviours. And this is more about the dynamics in the team. Not so much the work that we're doing, but how we behave with each other. So what kind of people are we? And how do we relate to each other? How well do we know our colleagues? How well do we respect each other? What do we do when conflict arises? Have we got some ground rules for what it is to work well together? Those sort of questions come up when we look at team behaviours. One of the theories that I think is very useful to look at is Tuckman's theory, which is about team development. Now, Tuckman really looked at a team as a living organism. And I think this is quite an interesting concept, because a team is obviously made up of people, and people grow and develop as individuals, but a team also has a life cycle. And Tuckman divided this cycle into a number of stages. So he talked about forming, the forming stage, the storming stage, the norming stage, and the performing stage. And there's also, latterly, he added a fifth stage, which was sometimes referred to as mourning, which, if you think about it, is the sort of the end of a team's life cycle. And I'll say a bit more about each stage. The important thing about each of these stages too is it requires from you as the team leader to operate in a different way, to adapt your style of leadership to meet the needs of the team's development stage. So each of these stages, we have a different focus of attention. On the first stage, the forming stage, the focus is on our team goals. What are we trying to achieve as a team? So a team may be brought together brand new to look at a particular issue or topic that needs addressing in the organisation. But many of the teams we join or we lead are all already formed. But it's important, as Tuckman says in his theory, and I think in practice, to see that every time a new leader takes over a team or a new person joins a team, to some degree we have to revert back to that early stage because we're reforming. And again, revisit some of the issues that we are concerned about at that stage. The first being, and the most important for that stage, is what are we about? What are we trying to achieve? And that we all understand what that is. The second stage, storming, the focus is more on roles. But as the name implies, storming sometimes feels a bit stormy, i.e. that's often an area where there's conflict arising and sometimes challenges to the leadership. And this is quite normal. If you think about team development being a bit like a child's development. So you have infancy and then you have a more stormy adolescence, don't you? If you're parents, you'll know what I mean, where you get challenged. Your authority's challenged. It's not personal, it's just about growing up. And that's what teams are often doing at this stage. They're wanting to know who's really responsible here, who's really in charge here, what's my role, what's your role, what's the grey areas, and where they overlap or clash, conflicts can arise. Sometimes these conflicts can be, hopefully, very productive if the team leader is aware of how to handle them well and everybody's engaged in resolving those conflicts. Sometimes, however, and I've worked with teams like this, teams get stuck in storming. They don't move beyond it and they need external help, sometimes people like me who come in and help them sort out their difficulties because they can't move on to the next stage. The next stage is norming. And norming is where we focus on processes. Now, a lot of these are explicit. Some of the things I talked about earlier about how many times we agree to meet, what format do our meetings have, who leads them, those sort of things are explicitly agreed between us. But a lot of the norms that we establish in teams are not explicit. They just sort of happen. And when new people join the team, that's when we become aware of them because we sort of think, well, that's not the way we do things here, or this is the way we do things here, and we might not have actually brought this to our conscious awareness before then. So some of the things I'm talking about are hopefully positive norms, like we as a team always support each other, we as a team encourage each other to do well. Those could be positive norms, but you can equally have established negative norms in a team. I've worked for teams and I've been part of teams where one of the norms is always to be late. Always late for meetings. We call a meeting at 2 p.m. in the afternoon and everybody knows that no one will really get there before 2:15, 2:30. So that becomes a negative norm. And there are more serious negative norms, I think, that can happen in teams as well. So our job as a leader is to bring these to conscious awareness and actually make sure that the norms, the way we do things here, are actually supportive to the tasks that we're trying to achieve and supportive to the people in the team. If we've done the work well, then we move through to this ultimate stage, which is performing. And what Tuckman means by this is performing really excellently well. And the focus here is on relationship. By now we should know each other pretty well as a team, and we'll know each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses, and we'll have learnt to work well with those in a constructive way. And if we've done the job well and we've worked through the conflicts and we've got productive outcomes and we're not afraid to challenge each other, then we'll have a high-performing team. A team that really is able to take on a task that stretches them, be proud of their achievements, celebrate those achievements, and have a sense of solidarity and belonging in the team, but not at the expense of other teams. I think so often we form as a team in a negative way in relation to other teams. You know, it's all for one and one for all, but we're against the common enemy. A high-performing team, however, is better at cooperating not just internally with each other, but actually externally too, knows how to bring other teams alongside them so that they can all achieve. the final stage of this model, which isn't true of every team all the time, of course. Some teams go on to live for a long time, but some teams, task teams, projects teams, have a natural ending, and we have to move on to reform and new teams. And there is a mourning process, a bit like when a dear friend passes on, or a member of the family, or a bereavement of some kind. This sounds terribly sad, but I think it's important to mark what's been good about the life of the team. What have we achieved? Maybe a celebration of the life of the team, but also an ending to actually make the point that the life cycle of this team now is coming to an end, and we can celebrate, but we need to sort of make a proper ending and say goodbye before we move on to other things. I have a question now to pose to you. So be thinking about a team that you lead or that you're part of. What stage of development would you say you're at as a team? And if you're leading that team, what do you need to be focusing on as a leader? Is there something you need to do or do differently that would help that team progress in its development? Another important theorist in relation to teams and team development is Belbin and his 9 team roles. Now, his definition is quite interesting. He says, a team is not a bunch of people with job titles, but a congregation of individuals, each of whom has a role which is understood by other members. Members of a team seek out certain roles and they perform these most effectively in the ones that they are most natural to them. So what Belbin's doing there is he's acknowledging that we all have preferences, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and the job of the team leader is to really identify what are the strengths that we have in the team, and to see, do we have the broad representation of all the types of roles that we need to make it a really successful team. So let's have a look at what these roles are. Belbin's 9 team roles. He talks about a plant, a resource investigator, a coordinator, shaper, monitor evaluator, team worker, implementer, completer finisher, and specialist. Now, there is a questionnaire that you could do that will help you identify which of these are your key roles that you feel most comfortable in and perform best at in the team. So these are not job description roles, they're not areas of responsibility, but they're personality types in a team, really. The sort of roles that we typically play, whichever team we go into. And I've found it to be a very good team building exercise to get members of my own team to fill out that questionnaire and then to look at the spread of skills and abilities that we have within the team. I'd like to talk about a couple of them just to give you some examples, because they each have strengths and they each have weaknesses. So the plant, for example, has a real strength in creative, imaginative, free thinking. This is a person who generates lots of ideas and is really good at solving difficult problems. But the weakness of the plant, because they all have weaknesses, is this person can also be pretty dismissive of incidentals and detail, not really interested, and can be often very preoccupied in their own ideas and bringing them about, that they don't really communicate very effectively with other people. They're sort of lost in their own world often. The opposite of this kind of person probably is the team worker. This is someone who's perhaps not coming up with the greatest ideas in the meeting, but their strengths are they're highly cooperative, they're very perceptive, they're very diplomatic people, they listen well, and they're very good at helping create harmony in teams. However, their weakness is they can be very indecisive because when the crunch comes, they can see every side of the argument, so it's hard for them to really be committed to one side. And also, because they're very good at creating harmony and getting everyone alongside them, they don't like conflict, so they avoid confrontation. And that can be a problem in a team. Another one that is often very useful in a team to have is the completer finisher. Strengths of that person is they're painstakingly conscientious, they search out errors, they polish things, they perfect ideas, and they perfect all sorts of research and thoughts and papers and proposals, etc. So they're very, very useful in that way. But on the other hand, they can be too pernickety, a little bit prone to worrying unduly, and they don't like delegating, because to delegate means they won't get it done as well and as perfectly as they think they can do it. So you can see that all of these different roles have their pluses and minuses, and we need, in a really effective team, to have a range of all 9 roles. Now, this is not often what practically happens, because certain people are attracted to different kinds of work, and often in our teams we find we're a bit top heavy. Too many plants, not enough resource investigators, too many coordinators, not enough shapers. So what we can do is we can identify this as the team leader and then try to help people play to their second preferences perhaps, or the areas that they're a little bit weaker in, to develop themselves so that we strengthen the team as a whole. Another question for you then as the team leader. Just judging from the titles of these roles, do you think you've got a range of types in your team? Do you think there are some areas that might be underrepresented? What are your first thoughts about what you might need to do to get a broader spread of skills and abilities and strengths in your team? Patrick Lencioni has a very interesting theory about dysfunction in teams, and I'd like to just talk a little bit about what he sees as the 5 key dysfunctions, and see if you recognise any of these in any teams you've been part of, hopefully not in the one you're in at the moment. At the base of the triangle, he talks about absence of trust. So do we really trust each other? Can we relax into being a team together, or is there a lot of internal conflict that prevents that, or even that we don't know each other very well? Or perhaps we're actually competing internally with each other rather than collaborating. So do we trust each other is his first question. And that leads us into the second level, which is fear of conflict. Conflict exists in every group of people. It doesn't necessarily mean war or real fighting, but it's there. There's always power relationships in every group. And conflict can be very productive, because when we disagree openly and we don't take it personally and we don't mean it personally, we can get some better ideas as a result and better ways forward. However, a lot of teams are very fearful of handling conflict, and so we become overly polite with each other, very careful. We never give each other the bad news. We don't give each other honest feedback. We hold back from saying the things that are really important for fear of causing trouble. The third dysfunction he talks about is a lack of commitment, where team members don't really care about the team. They don't feel that they belong, they're part of it. It doesn't really matter to them. They might even be a bit ashamed of the team. It might be that the team doesn't feel like something they want to be associated with. And so it could be they're not interested in the work, but they maybe just don't want to really commit themselves to saying, yes, I'm in this team and I am part of this team and I'm proud to belong here. The fourth dysfunction is avoidance of accountability. So the team seems to agree things in meetings, in team meetings, and we seem to know what we're going to do going forward, and we have an action plan. But somehow these things don't really happen according to plan, the deadlines are missed. And when that happens, people do not call each other to account because, going down the ladder again, they're fearful of conflict. And even further down, perhaps they don't trust each other enough to be able to do that. So there's a lack of accountability. And the fifth dysfunction is an inattention to results. And this seems extraordinary when you think about it, because if you thought about a sports team, for example, a football team, it would be quite extraordinary, wouldn't it, for people to play a game on a Saturday afternoon and not care about the result. That the supporters didn't care and the people playing didn't really care. That's unthinkable. And yet in work teams, often we don't really focus fully enough on our results. What have we achieved? Did we do what we set out to do? Can we celebrate those things that we did well? Can we also look at what we need to do differently for the things that we've failed to achieve? Lencioni goes on to talk about the 5 behaviours of functioning teams, high-performing teams. And of course, as you might expect, they are the converse of the dysfunctions. So they trust one another. They engage in unfiltered conflict around ideas, and I think that's quite important, around ideas. They're not conflicting with each other as people. They're not having personal vendettas, but they're very open to discuss honestly with each other things they don't agree about. And I know this from my own experience. The best team I ever worked in, we were very, very honest with each other. But the basis of that was we knew and we trusted each other. And we knew that when we disagreed, it wasn't about not liking each other. It was about not agreeing with people's judgments or ideas. And therefore we felt safe to have those kind of honest discussions. They also commit to decisions and plans of action. So they don't just pay lip service. They actually say, yes, I'm going to do this. Yes, we're going to do this. And we're going to do it in the way we've agreed. And then they hold each other to account. They are accountable as individuals and as a team for delivering against their plans. And so they're very conscious of reminding each other, supporting each other, and challenging each other to hold to their agreements. And most importantly, they focus on the achievements of the team, but on the collective results, not just on the individual results. Yes, they would celebrate an individual's particular achievement, of course, but actually they look at themselves as a team, so all for one and one for all. When someone achieves something, that reflects well on all of us. And when somebody doesn't, that also reflects badly on all of us. So there's much more of a sense in a really performing team that we're all in this together. I'd like now to talk about some practical things you can do that can help you achieve some of these factors that Lencioni says are very important in building really successful and effective teams. So the first area I want to look at is how can you help build trust in the team? And as a facilitator and trainer and developer, I'm often called in when teams are at that early stage of forming to help them really get to know each other and to build trust as the basis for really good teamwork. And some of the exercises I've done with teams on away days or team meetings have been to have personal history exercises, give people an opportunity to say a bit more about who they are, not just the work that they do, their qualifications or their experience, but what sort of people are they? What do they do outside of work, if it's appropriate to ask those questions? And what are they interested in? What are their hobbies? What makes them their heart sing? What do they really care about? And I think a lot of getting to know people in a different way makes a big difference to building trust. You can also do some exercises, team effectiveness exercises, where you might build something together, do something together that actually gives you a chance to experience out of the everyday work of the team something different that illustrates how you work as a team. And that can be very effective, it can be fun, but it's a way of showing the interrelationship between people and the way in which we have to trust each other to really succeed. There's a number of personality and behavioural profiles that you can bring in to bear. I mean, the Belbin one I described earlier could be a very good questionnaire to do with the team. Some of you might know the Myers-Briggs type inventory, the MBTI, where people can share their personality profiles and you can learn who's in your team, what are their strengths, what are their allowable weaknesses, how can we work together better and understand each other better. And of course there's always 360-degree feedback, which can be very useful to get some feedback for yourself and for other members of the team, from each other, from your colleagues outside of the team, from your managers, and from the people that you serve, from your clients, your customers, your students. And sharing that in the team with each other can be a really good way of understanding each other and building trust. Some suggestions here then for managing conflict more productively, because we know that conflict is going to arise. The team leader has a particular role, I think, in what I call mining for conflict. And what I mean by that is a lot of conflict can go on under the surface. In the best team I ever worked in, and I mentioned that team earlier, one of the agreements we had with each other and with our team leader was that we would never talk about another member of the team to a third party, say things about that person to a third party that we wouldn't talk about to them directly. And that really focused our attention on gossip and the negative aspects of that can go on in teams. And I think what our team leader there was very good at was bringing out the slightly hidden agendas that people might have at meetings, where you could feel things weren't very comfortable, but you didn't know why. And this can be done very tactfully, very diplomatically. It doesn't have to be a big showdown, but I think it can be really helpful to say to people, you know, I know that you two are not getting on very well at the moment. Could we talk about what's going on? Or something is stopping us as a team making a decision in this meeting. What's going on here? So it's mining, those sort of questions that mine for further information, that go below the surface and say, let's talk about some of those agendas that we have and see if we can resolve them. The other thing I think that's really important is to give ourselves as a team permission to talk about what's going on in the moment, to say, you know, if we're not happy with something or we feel that decisions are being made that we're really not convinced by, to give people real-time permission to say, I don't agree, or this is not working for me, without fear that those people are going to be punished in some way or judged in a bad way. I think enabling people to voice areas of disagreement in a productive way can be very valuable to the team. And the third area you can use to help you with conflict is, again, giving people more chance to assess themselves. We all have our preferences in the way that we deal or avoid conflict. And I think it's really useful to learn more about what those are. And there are various assessment tools, conflict tools that you can look at that show you answer a simple questionnaire that helps you identify, what's my preference when dealing with conflict? Am I an avoider? Am I someone that goes in fighting? Am I someone that defends myself? Am I someone that takes all the blame? Am I someone that tries to make peace when really I should be helping people talk more honestly? So these are some of the things you can do to help you think about the sometimes tricky area of conflict. Here are some suggestions to help you think about increasing people's commitment to the team. One of the things we have to do as managers is to cascade messages that come from on high in the organisation further down through the ranks of the organisation. And we rely on our team to help us do that so they can talk to their people about what needs to happen in the organisation. It might be a new policy that's come from the executive of the organisation. It might be something that's changing in the way that we want to work together in future as an organisation. And this can be very important in building people's commitment, to be talking from the same page, if you like, to all be understanding the messages correctly and to be able to pass on those messages in a way that can encourage commitment from people further down the organisation. What we don't want are people disagreeing and then really undermining the messages that come from our senior management. But it is important to allow people time to discuss them and understand them, and maybe, if they really vehemently disagree, to find the appropriate channels for doing that. Another thing as a team that can make a really big difference to us becoming more committed as a team is to clarify and honour deadlines. So not let deadlines slip. If we've agreed to do something to a certain deadline, then let's stick to it. And we know in life things don't always go according to plan, but at least to alert each other that the deadline may be slipping and giving good reasons why, and then finding ways of rectifying that, bringing in more support to help team members actually meet their commitments. Partly too, I think it's down to contingency and exploring worst case scenarios. So this can help us when we're building commitment to say to the team, if we don't deliver on this very important part of our work, what's the very worst that could happen? I mean, what will this do to our reputation as a team? What contingency do we have within the team? Say if somebody goes sick and it's an important job that needs doing, where else in the team can we look for support? Or beyond the team? What are our contingency plans? And to make everybody fully aware of the importance of not failing in something we've committed to. And I think finally, low risk exposure. And I say low risk. We don't want to ridicule people and, stand them up in front of their colleagues and humiliate them because they didn't do what they said they were going to do. That's not going to be good for team morale. But it's important, isn't it, to be able to say to people individually or sometimes in the group, you haven't met your commitments. You promised to do something you haven't done. That's not going to be acceptable in future. So please alert us if you need more help, if you need more time. That's not a problem. But don't just not do what you said you were going to do. Suggestions for enhancing accountability of team members. Some of the things you can do here are you can publish your goals and standards as a team. Now, you may want to do this internally at first if you're a new team, but as you grow in confidence as a team, it's a really good idea to let other teams and other colleagues know what you stand for, what you're aiming to do, and what standards you expect of yourselves. This is a way of holding yourself as a team to account, because you're making what you value public. Also, I think often underused are just simply giving people the opportunity to review progress in your regular team meetings, to ask the question of everybody, how's it going? What's going well in the work you're doing at the moment? What's not going so well? What are the difficulties? What are the challenges? What are the obstacles? And to do those regular the progress reviews can be very effective, just in a general way, but particularly when you're running an important project, to have regular progress reviews built into the plans so that you sit down and properly look at what's working, what's not working, what's still to do, what's new that needs to be overcome, that wasn't an obstacle at first but now is. This is an important part of being accountable. And also having rewards, having ways in which you can reward the team for achieving what they set out to do. I think that, we don't want to give people too many pats on the back if it's not authentic and real, but actually giving people an opportunity to celebrate what they've done well, does motivate people, and they often want to do more in the future as a result of that. And so much of that kind of feedback is so underused in organisations, in my experience, and yet it's a free, simple way of really engaging people and making them feel more part of something that's bigger than themselves, and therefore making them far more accountable to their colleagues and to you as the team leader. Well, if you've made your goals and your standards public, then why not also publish your results? As I said before, if you were a supporter of a football team, you'd want to know what the results are. And your colleagues will feel the same. They'll be interested to know, did they do what they said they were going to do? And how well have they done against what they planned to do? So publishing your results and making something of them for your team internally too, celebrating your successes in relation to the results that you achieve, can be a really powerful motivator of your team. Let me summarise what I've been talking about. Firstly, it's important to give attention to team structure, processes and behaviours. Have I got the right people doing the right jobs in the team? Are we meeting regularly and communicating well together? And how do we treat each other? What kind of levels of trust do we have? And do we cooperate or compete with each other internally in the team and with our colleagues externally? I also have talked about Tuckman's model of the team development cycle and asked you to think about different stages of team development and what kinds of focus you need as the leader, particularly at each of these stages. And to be aware too that every time someone joins a team or leaves a team, you really have to go back a few stages and almost begin again in the forming process. I've also talked about Belbin's team roles as one of the ways in which you can look at the strengths and weaknesses in your team. Have you got an adequate spread of types of personality and roles that people play more comfortably in your team? Are there some gaps? If there are, how are you going to fill them as the team leader? How are you going to engage other people in the team to help you do that? And finally, we looked at the 5 key dysfunctions, but also the functioning elements of really high-performing teams, the factors that make that possible. And we talked about some of the practical things you can do yourself and with your team to become more effective as a team.